Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, what the heck's wrong with you? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you believe changing our workplaces is going to change our world, we got a real treat for you. We got the one and only Christian Hun. If you don't know this guy, find him on the console, follow him. You're going to feel smarter every time he opens his mouth. Hopefully I'm not selling you, Christian. So let's welcome him with a nice Ethicsverse wave of emojis. As we get started and run through our announcements, please make sure to drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Your network is your net worth. You are part of an extremely collegial, a very special community here, and you get no bonus points in life for reinventing the wheel. So reach out to somebody, expand that network, and stop carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. We got a real treat for you today. We're going to be talking about lessons, compliance everywhere, lessons from everyday life. Christian is an expert in behavioral science, and we're going to bring that down to earth and talk about how we can apply some of those tactics and techniques to get better engagement from our employee base. A couple of quick announcements. As always, I love to learn. I love to push the all this thought leadership that's coming out in our community. So click this QR code and you're going to see the Ethico library of books and some podcasts that we love and that are in our rotation. So the two gurus talk compliance. If you haven't checked that one out, I definitely want to give that one a plug. They put an episode out every other week, and it's just a great conversation between Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, and the one and only Christy Grant Hart. So check that out. Ethics Experts, another award-winning episode with Judy Spain. This is a phenomenal conversation, if I do say so myself. She's super smart, and she's really tactical about how she can get things done in a very complex environment. She comes from higher ed. So check this one out. Also check this out. Everybody's talking about it in my house because I won't shut up about it. The FCPA Survival Guide. So me and Tom Fox went through his book. We did a 10-part series, short little bite-sized little snacks of insights about how to survive an FCPA situation. So check that out. And if you haven't gotten the book, you can pick it today. You can hit that QR code and buy it if you like. Couple other announcements. So we have SCCE CEI coming up. So this is going to be in Austin, Texas in just a few weeks. So I want you to save the date. If you're coming, save the date. We're going to have a party on the 23rd, the evening of the 23rd. I think that's Monday. So details to follow. And my brother and I are doing a presentation called, listen to this one, AI for Case Management Data Analysis, using AI tools to analyze your results. A lot of us need some help with data storytelling. A lot of us need some help with data analytics. And so we're going to show you how to leverage AI in a very safe way without any privacy concerns to get some answers and really rip out your board presentations a little bit faster and a little bit more insightful. So that's going to be on Tuesday from 11:45 to 12:45. Expect to see you all there. Okay. Next thing is this. So the state of our workplace is that we're not getting enough risk intelligence. Our job is to crowdsource risk intelligence at scale, provide those insights back to the point of risk so that we can de-risk the organization, help our company run down the road of commerce faster. And so what's happening, though, is people are 6 to 8 times more likely to go to a manager than to engage in the reporting system that you have in place. Enter the Middle Manager Toolkit. So if you haven't downloaded this, people are absolutely loving this. Let me read you a little feedback I just got. I had a chance to review, this is from somebody in the industry, by the way. This is not from my mom this time. We had a chance to review the Middle Manager Toolkit and white paper. What a great concept to put together. I really feel for middle managers because they are people who were many times previously in frontline work that gained experience to transition to a manager role and haven't received that managerial training. That's why the toolkit you put together is so useful. It's free. That's why the toolkit you put together is so useful. It's important that managers are trained to have good understanding of what their role is, the goals of that role, and how to accomplish them. Having that outlined in terms of their part in the ethics and compliance and quality goals for the company is so important. What was really useful were the examples of how middle managers could fit this into their work structure and interactions with staff. So again, we're trying to make this very plug and play. This is where our battleground is. Our battleground is on the middle managers to really echo the song that we're singing. So check that out if you have not downloaded it yet. I think you're going to love it. I wanted to give you guys a quick little glimpse of our clients' outcomes. So again, our job is to crowdsource that risk intelligence and use tech to focus our efforts and focus our work on the biggest risks there are. So you can see substantial, differences in terms of case closure time, substantiation rates, and so forth. And just a little glimpse of, I think, what makes us different is our commitment to quality. So you can see here, Everybody who runs our call center, our intake center, has their CCEP certification. That takes a lot of work, of course, those of you who have gotten that. And we train really hard. We spend a lot of time training our reps to be a true extension of our client's team, because that is a really critical time. We're finally getting a fish on the hook. We're finally getting someone to raise their hand and speak up about something. We need to treat those people with respect and with dignity, and get those questions answered so that they can spread the word and we can get more of that, right? We need to crowdsource more of that risk intelligence. So if you like that and you're interested in it, hit us up, no pitch zone type, demo. And what I've seen a lot of folks start to do recently is they end up coming over to us on disclosures because perhaps they have a contract that's in place. So if you're interested in any of that, hit us up. All right, now to the meat of the presentation. Okay. We are giving away today, like I say every week, I don't even like making money around here. I just like giving away books. So we're giving away one of my favorite books, Humanizing Rules by the one and only Christian Hunt. This book is phenomenal. If you don't have it yet, participate today and you'll get one for free. We were going to give away 5, but we got the guy here. So we're going to go ahead and double that. We're going to be giving away 10 today. So keep those comments coming, keep those questions coming, share your insights and tactics on how you have been able to, employ some of these behavioral science techniques in your own organization, so that we can crowdsource that together. Okay. You know me, I'm Nick, a little lazy-eyed today, but space is a crazy place to be. Here is the man, the myth, the legend, Christian Hunt. So Christian Hunt is, he has a background. He was head of behavioral science at UBS, and he is the founder of Human Risk. He has a podcast that I love. Every day, almost, he puts out great content on LinkedIn, great, phenomenal insights. And so really happy to have you on, Christian. How's it going?
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be with the man I consider to be the Ryan Seacrest of ethics and compliance. So I'll try and do my Simon Cowell routine from the other side of the Atlantic. But it's such a pleasure to be with you again, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Very good. I'll take that. I like that vibe that we got going. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So you got a lot of compliance in the wild examples for the Ethicsverse. So give us kind of the high level, kind of 30,000 foot view of what we're going to be talking about today, Christian.
Sure. So you mentioned behavioral science, and behavioral science is all about what are the real drivers of human decision making, not the things we kid ourselves, the reasons we give other people, but the genuine reasons. And as you pointed out in one of the trailer videos for this, that's often, it's a very academic discipline in many respects. We have people studying this stuff. And what I do is try and take that and say, how can we make this real for people? And I'm a fundamentally lazy guy, Nick. And so one of the things I try to do is to go, look, if I'm trying to solve a problem in a compliance context, then there may be other people out there that have tried to solve that problem in a different context. And my thinking is, if we can borrow from them, then we don't necessarily copy what they do. We may do precisely the opposite, but we can be informed by what they are doing. And so I evolved this idea of compliance in the wild, which is literally taking the idea of compliance, influencing people to do something or not do something, and say, what can we see in the world around us in our day-to-day lives that might be interesting for us when we think about how we apply compliance? And the reason I think that's important is that very often the way we approach it within organizations is we do stuff we would never, ever do in another context. And so I like to kind of look at the real world and go, what happens in the real world? What techniques are people using? And maybe there's the odd compliance lesson that we can learn from it. So it's taking compliance into a completely different field. I will apologize in advance, Nick, because what this will mean is once people start to think in these terms, you will see compliance everywhere. By which I mean you will see attempts to influence us to do things or not do things all around us. So it's quite overwhelming, but it's super powerful because often the problems that we're trying to solve have already been solved or not solved by other people, and we can learn from that.
And so why I love, this whole angle is because so much of our job is creativity. We can't keep doing what we've been doing and expect, a new result, right? So we have to change what we're doing. We have to make small tweaks to our thinking. We have to make small tweaks to the programs that we have in place. Otherwise, those things are going to go stale. And I think to your point, when we can put on this lens and we can start seeing, there are all these nudges to our behavior everywhere. They're on social media, they're on signs, we're constantly being influenced, and those influences are meant to kind of change our behaviors. We can really start to creatively borrow, as I like to say. It sounds a lot better than steal. We can creatively borrow from some of the, from these things that we see, and start to experiment our organization to make those folks kind of behave in a bit of a different way. How do we sort of at scale nudge a populace of employees? That's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, and of course, nudging is just one part of behavioral science. It's the kind of poster child, if you like, for the function. But there are lots of other examples of where people are trying to influence it. And the other reason it's worth thinking about the what I call the real world, right, outside our organizations and looking at those things, is that often we can see stuff that people have spent a load of money on. And we know that generally, if organizations are spending a load of money on something, that it must on some level be working. So advertising would be the best example. You don't get to run an ad campaign unless there is some evidence that that is increasing sales of your product or service. And so there would be a good example of saying those advertisements, if you've seen a campaign that's running for many, many years, it's going to be working. And so that tells us something interesting about humans. Now, of course, I'm not saying just because it works in an ad, it'll automatically work but if there's money behind it in the real world, if governments are doing it or companies are doing it, spending money on this stuff, that's a pretty helpful start to say there must be something here that works that prompts them to spend that money.
So Vicky, hey Vicky, Vicky said, how do you like coming on the Ethicsverse? We just start with all these compliments, Christian. Vicky said, I love the example you shared on LinkedIn today, Christian, regarding the Royal Navy. Sometimes even the highest levels of training don't result in the right decisions and behaviors. I think that's right. Maybe let's start with that one. Just talk to us conceptually about that post, because I thought that was spot on. I'm glad Vicky brought it up. Thanks, Vicky.
So yeah, I like to look in all sorts of different contexts. And what we had happening here, and this happened about a year ago, but has just recently come to light, is that in the apologies to those of you in the US, this is the US Navy. What they had discovered was that the senior officers on a particular ship had set themselves up with a Starlink internet connection so that the senior officers on board this ship could get match scores, communicate with their families, watch movies, that kind of thing. And they were caught doing this, and disciplinary action has followed. Now, what I think is really interesting about that example is, if you think about it, you want your warships to be out there in, you don't want their location to be obvious. So if you're sticking an internet connection, and let's think about who owns Starlink as well, if you want a slight angle there. If you're sticking an internet connection on this thing, you are making your ship incredibly vulnerable. So this is a really, really simple, basic error. You want, you wouldn't want the position to be exposed. You probably don't want the sort of traffic going to and from it that would allow people who might want to know where it is to identify it. And so it's a really, really obvious basic point. And for some reason, the senior officers on this ship thought that they could get away with it. And they'd set it up for themselves in a kind of, well, we'll have the benefit of it. Nobody else will allow it. And we'll try and keep it secret. Now, the idea that you could possibly keep this thing secret is insane, or that it would be a good idea. And you don't even need to understand much about the military to recognize why that's a bad idea. So I think this is a beautiful example of where you look at it and say, look, this is exactly the same dynamic that we see in other organizations. Now, most people on this call are probably not working in the military. You may not need to keep the location of your assets secret, but on some level, you will recognize the idea that there are rules in place, and those rules need to be respected by everybody. We may have senior people thinking the rules don't apply to them and that they can get away with it. Terrible tone from the top. And so there are a ton of things that we can look at here and say, not a situation that any of us may find ourselves in, but we can start to see these things are common. And of course, one of the lessons I would learn from that is to say, look, we often assume that seniority equals know what they're doing. Experience is valuable. And that is true on some level, but experience can also blind us, because we can also say to ourselves, well, actually, I know what I'm doing. Those rules are for the junior people who don't know what they're doing. I should be above those rules. And we know what happens when that goes on. So there's a really good illustration of a simple story. I don't know much more than it says in the article that I linked to today, but it's something I'm absolutely investigating, because I think it's just a really good issue. You would think the military would have lots of discipline. And in this case, clearly they didn't. Something went wrong. And that's potentially quite worrying. And so those same dynamics could play themselves out in our organizations. Just worth thinking about how that might work out.
Yeah, and that, you mentioned that tone from the top. Of course, that gets out. Of course, the guys in the mess hall, I'm not a military guy, I just imagine that it's probably called a mess hall. They're in the mess hall, and he mentions that he's talking to his mom, or he talked to his mom, and the guy's like, how did you talk to your mom? This is supposed to be a blacked out ship, It just causes other folks who are supposed to be following these rules to start questioning, well, like, which other of these rules don't actually matter? Which other of these rules, should we just be paying lip service to? And this dynamic, happens all the time in all kinds of organizations. So thanks for bringing that up, Vicky. All right, you want to jump to this first one, Christian?
Yeah, let's take a little look at an example. And I have some nice little software, Nick, that allows me to put myself in the image. A couple of things I would say on this one. The first one is, notice up here just above my head, that is my little compliance in the wild wolf. You know that he's a compliance wolf. The wolf is the wild bit, because he's got a little pencil and a checklist. So we're balancing those two things out. So that's my logo for this series. Now, what we have here is a traffic junction. And if you look at this is quite a lot of information to take on board. And each individual sign makes perfect sense. But if you look at the totality of what you are supposed to make sense of as a driver, it's kind of overwhelming and incredibly confusing. And if you think about this, we are looking at this in a static position, right? With this equivalent of the light being red, which it is here, we're looking at this and we are struggling to imagine you are in a moving vehicle trying to process this. And I think I always use this as an example of sometimes how employees can feel about compliance. A ton of rules being thrown at you, all of which may well be sensible of their own accord, but how do we balance that? So this is a reminder of the cognitive load that's on people. We throw rules and more training and more things that we need people to remember. Sometimes it's just worth stepping back and going, the individual components might make sense, but if you present it in this way, where are people even supposed to start? Which is the most important rule that's presented here? So for me, this is a really good visual illustration of the kinds of challenge. And it may not be that we intend that. We're trying to be helpful. We're trying to give people loads of information. But when you look at this is impossible to process stationary, let alone when you're moving.
I love that blue one on the bottom right. Like, how do you even read that one? You know. What? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and then, you know, there are some signs that you could combine. You've got two things telling you directions that you can't go in. Might it not be more effective to have one telling you the way you should go? You know, lots and lots of things that you do there. And the colors, again, individual signs are designed with a specific color scheme to make sense. But when you put them with other things, they no longer make sense. And so the point of this one to bear in mind is the totality of what's there. It's not the individual signs that are the problem. It is the total. I often refer to this as a sort of, you know, fruit salad of signs. Far too much for people to take on board. And therefore the risk is that they don't pay attention to any of them.
And so where do we see an example of this? Like, what's a corollary inside of a compliance program or an ethics program? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, let's start with communications. Often we may be bombarding people with communications. We're regularly putting messages out there. Think about the volume of those. Are those consistent? Are we asking people to remember 500 things? Are there core messages that we need to get across? Are there potentially communications that contradict each other, that say you need to do A and those contradictions may be perfectly valid, but we've got to remember it from the perspective of people that aren't used to seeing this. The people putting up the signs know what those signs are there for. They understand the logic behind it. They spend their whole time designing and thinking about where signs go. What they don't do is sit behind the wheel looking at things. So I would say communications is one example. Training. We often think, you know, the solution to many things in compliance is more training. Let's do another training course. Or something's not working the way we expected. Another training course. Let's do more training. Well, actually, maybe there's too much. Maybe there's too much overload. So the key bit here is to think about what is it we're asking people to go through, particularly in given situations. Are there times of the year? Are there physical locations? Are there processes where there is, frankly, information overload? And we can think about that in policies. You know, I want to do something and I'm required to read 10 different policies to get to the answer to my question. Well, if that thing I'm doing is unusual, then maybe that's okay. But if that's a regular process lots of people are going to have to do, then it becomes overwhelming. And so think about this as information overload. Now, how easy is it for me to navigate what is there? And of course, remember, if you're going through this junction on a regular basis, you will have familiarity with it, right? You can probably work it out for yourself. If you are here for the first time, that's a different situation. So again, thinking about what is the level of expertise and experience of the people we have. And maybe for people that are experienced at this junction, half those signs are unnecessary. They just know. But for people that are new, they're going to need certain signs to help guide them through it. So thinking about the different levels that people have in the organization, maybe you want to think about communicating to people that have just joined the organization in a different way to people that have been there a long time.
We were just looking for new houses, me and my family. And so we were going to all these houses and we were looking at these houses and like some of these houses, none of these people are on this webinar, so I can speak freely here. Some of these houses you step into and you're just like, how the heck could somebody actually live like this? Well, it's like you just get desensitized to it or you just get kind of used to it. And I think that like desensitization, if that's a word, happens to all of us. And like, it's really important for us to be able to like take the, you know, kind of take fresh eyes to something or kind of, you know, come back with that like beginner's mind and like look at something fresh, because many times it just kind of, we just keep adding, addendum, you know, we keep adding addenda to contracts, we keep adding trainings, we keep adding signs. And, you know, that incremental addition is not a needle mover, but when you step back to your point, you end up seeing like, man, this is probably wildly ineffective. And think about the implication of that. Like there's always two messages that are delivered, right? One is like the actual words we're delivering. And then the other thing is like what people are interpreting about it. So, you know, we talk about this with training a lot. If you have a crappy training that's just like a PowerPoint presentation versus one that's, you've clearly made an investment in. The content could be very, very much the same, but the net sort of message delivery is going to be very different. One seems like this doesn't matter. This is just kind of some BS. This one seems like, okay, this actually matters. And I think if we can take that same kind of fresh eyes to, our kind of risk management apparatus, there's many times cases where we can see like, okay, we need to maybe rethink this, or we need to trim some stuff, we need to trim some stuff out of this, or really kind of focus more on that core message.
The other thing that's worth remembering, Nick, is that when we think about traffic signs like this, is that they haven't necessarily all been put there by the same authority. So depending on the nature of the road, you might find that the city that this is in may have put some signs up. You may find there's a national authority that's put other signs up. And so in a compliance context, also worth remembering that when we think about the load on people, it isn't just the compliance load. And so there will be other functions within the organization who are also imposing requirements on people. That might be HR, that might be health and safety, that might be information security. And we won't necessarily see all of those things. And so sometimes it's helpful to step back and go, what else is crowding the space at the moment? And that might be a function of time, place, or the particular activity that people are engaging in. If there are lots of other people bombarding them with information, that can create overload as well. So it's not necessarily the root cause of this on our own. We may just have one of those signs. But if your one sign is covered by loads of other things, then there's a risk of it not being seen at all. And so one of the other things to think about is to see what else is going out. Think about this as airtime. What else is going out at a similar time on the airwaves? And therefore, maybe what I need to do is to if I do have to put all the things out that I'm putting out, can I find a different time or a different mechanism so that I'm not crowded out by the messages from HR or the messages from information security or whatever? Valid as those may be, if you're in competition with them, people can only watch one proverbial channel at a time, and they might miss yours. You want to make sure yours gets through.
Yeah, you could write the most beautiful song, but if you're playing that in a room with 20 other musicians, each playing their own song, no one's even going to hear it, So you got to fish where the fish are, and you have to pierce that veil of attention, because we are that's the currency right now. We have to get folks' attention if we're ever going to deliver a message that has any, cross your fingers, any hope of influencing that behavior. That's great advice.
Totally. Should we do another one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so this is one of my absolute favorites. So this is from a park in London. I spent half my time in Munich, where I am now, in Germany, and half my time in London. And this is in a little park near where I stay in London. And it's a beautiful example of several things happening. But you can see what they tried to do, which is they are trying to control access through wheeled vehicles. So they don't want people cycling or scooting through here at great speed for obvious reasons. And the control that they've used, these barriers, make perfect sense if the environment is correct for them. So if you can imagine, if there wasn't that green space over here on this side, then this control, as it were, makes perfect sense, right? It will do exactly what's required. However, in this particular circumstance, you can imagine that someone has planned this, that somebody has gone, we need to stop cycling through this park or slow it down. Let's put in place the usual control that we have. And the problem with it here is not only is it ineffective, but what it does is it tells anybody that's approaching this that if they want to break this particular rule, it doesn't say you can't do this, but if you want to break, you know how to do it. You just go around here, and you can see evidence that other people have broken the rule. So what we've got is a fascinating example here of a terrible control in the first place that is only going to get worse over time, because there are these subtle clues being left by the people that rule breaking, if you want to call it a rule, is the norm in this particular occasion. What's really interesting about this little park, I can't prove a linkage between the two, is that at the same time as this sort of general erosion of compliance, if you like, there's more graffiti, there's more dog mess and other issues. And I have a theory that is down to the fact that people have looked at the signs that are there telling you not to do these things and gone, these people are idiots, right? They put in place something that is so dumb, so idiotic, so futile, that actually I'm not going to respect any of their rules. I say I can't make that linkage necessarily, but it's worth thinking about. So I think this is a really good illustration of, we often design controls that are perfect for certain situations, and this one would be, except we deploy them sometimes in situations where they make no sense whatsoever. Not only does that lead to an issue of non-compliance in those situations, but it sends a signal that we have absolutely no understanding of the real world. And so when we see this, we laugh about it. We say, what a waste of money. But we also think that the people who are behind it clearly don't know what they're doing. They're a bunch of idiots. And therefore, I start to look at some of their other rules and start to question, do they really understand what's going on?
Yeah, and that's such a dangerous conclusion. I mean, that's that sort of secondary message I was kind of referring to on the last one. If they look at, if your people look at your controls or look at your messaging or look at, whatever you're putting out, and in their subconscious mind, they're thinking, are these people idiots? Do they not get it? That is going to be ringing in their subconscious mind on every single thing that you put out. And that is a headwind to any kind of compliance or any kind of behavior change that you're looking for. I think that that's so spot on because, again, there's multiple messages that are sent with a control or something else, And
it's also, if you think about things like you want people to come to you before something goes wrong, or they've made an honest mistake and they want to come and clear it up. If the perception is that you have no understanding of the real world, you are reducing that. What is the point in me going to talk to someone that clearly doesn't understand what we're about and how the real world operates? And so not only is it an ineffective control, the signaling effect that this thing has for subjects that have nothing to do with it. If you put in place a really petty bureaucratic control that people think is ridiculous and try and circumvent because it's petty and bureaucratic, the risk is that they think of you as being petty and bureaucratic, and therefore they're not going to come and have those conversations, the sort of preemptive, early warning conversations that you want to have. And maybe they might even go, well, there's no point in talking to these ever. And I'm just going to run the risk because the chances of them catching me, because this is how they think about the real world, is very limited. And so when you put all those things together, I'm not saying it will definitely happen, but there is an absolute risk of it. And so what this illustrates is that we need to think about every single intervention. And an intervention is a communication, a control, a policy, some training. Every single one of those has a signaling effect to our employees, and it will give them. Now, you can probably get away with one or two that are not great, right? And there are going to be times where we have to implement things that aren't amazing. But if you are doing it on a consistent basis, you're putting in place things that really look dumb from the perspective of your employees, then they will form a view of you. We all do that, right? We all, if you've ever had to deal with the government on something or you think they're being a bit bureaucratic, you will understand that and you will have a perception of that particular function. And so I point this out to people. One, we laugh about it, but two, think about the PR. Every single thing you're doing has PR. So try and remove those things that are idiotic or silly and recognize that what you think is sensible might not appear sensible to the people who actually have to live this stuff.
So I have a great real world example of this. Or like a work example of this. So I know a lot of companies have like shut off access to any kind of AI, right? Their people are not allowed to use AI for work. They're not allowed to use Copilot or whatever. So that's a control, right? That's the gate. But what I know, this is not an endorsement of this, by the way, but what I know people are doing is they just use their phone. They go on ChatGPT on their phone and then they Slack that to themselves. They have a tool on their phone that's also on their computer that's a way in. And so you can put all these barriers in place to make sure, no OpenAI, URLs are, accessible from the browser of any laptop. But if that's accessible on another device and there's that connection point in Slack or in Teams or in something else, well, then there's your path around the gate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a beautiful phrase I love to use, which is we need to think not how we would like people to behave, but how they are likely to behave. And what I mean by that is let's not delude ourselves that people aren't going to, the generative AI is a great example, right? It makes us more effective. It is a tool that is out there that people know about. Let's not pretend that they have never heard of it, right? That they can't access it, or that they're not going to be sitting there, particularly if they're under pressure in their job, or frankly, they just want an easier life. Of course, you're going to take advantage of this thing. And I know, to your point, Nick, I'm going to say this, I know that had I been a compliance officer, I was once one, at the point at which generative AI came out, even if the rule in the organization had been you may not use it, I would have been all over it. I would have been absolutely all over it because I would have seen the benefits. And I think that's exactly, it's your point, it's exactly right. Let's not pretend that things are smooth. We need to look at the world through a realistic lens. So don't think about what we would like people to do, think about what they're likely to do. Now that's harder, but if we do that, then we can suddenly start to think more creatively and we're actually trying to solve the underlying problem. Speaking of which, should we do the next one? Should we do the next one? Because this is one of my absolute favorites. Okay, I am going to take everybody to the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And you may know Amsterdam, beautiful city, is renowned, certainly in Europe, for being a little bit of a party capital. So there is there's prostitution, there's drugs that are easily available. So a lot of people, particularly from the UK, go there to party. So they are a little bit fed up with tourists behaving inappropriately. And so they started to run a campaign called How to Amsterdam. And so they put up, so they launched YouTube campaign. So if you searched for like a stag party, that's the English word for bucks party, Amsterdam on Google, you would come up with a video telling you about how the fact that if you had a party, they'd like to be arrested. So they intercepted web traffic, but they also did a campaign in the city itself to try and communicate with people that hadn't made it there about some of the behaviors that are acceptable, not acceptable. This is a very, very logical way of communicating compliance. So they put a sign up here talking about drugs, right? It tells you very simple, it's illegal to buy drugs from street dealers. Now, why is this problematic? Well, it is, of course, doing what it's supposed to do. It is telling you that to buy drugs from street dealers is illegal. It's potentially suggesting that buying other drugs is not illegal, which is an interesting linguistic challenge. But more importantly,
good point.
You know intuitively that when they put this sign up, they are going to put it in a location where it makes sense to put it, right? So if there were no drug dealing going on in this location, you would not need this sign. So what this sign is subliminally signaling to us is that this is a good place to pick up drugs. That's not the intention of the sign, but that's the message that we take from it. And so we've got to think about unintended secondary messaging. And let me move on to the next one as well from the same series, which is interesting. You can see what they're trying to prevent here. No public
Seems like a great place to pee.
Right. Well, so firstly, I know a number of people are going to comment and say this looks like a sexist image. I think, Nick, you and I have to be realistic on behalf of the male audience. We know the vast majority of people that are peeing will be doing it like this rather than another form. So I think we can accept that. But what's interesting about this is you put this sign up here. Let's think about the people who are likely to find themselves in a position where they need to undertake that activity. I would suggest that those are people who are likely to have potentially overindulged in certain things, who may not, let's put it, they're probably a bit cognitively challenged, right? They are unlikely to pay particular attention to this. And to your point, we are also signaling that this must be going on quite frequently. And therefore, on some level, there's subliminal messaging that that's the sort of thing that happens here. That's why you have to put a sign up to prevent it. So the reason I'm highlighting both of these things is I think it's a lovely example of two logical solutions to the problem. Let's tell people what we don't want them to do and what the consequences of that are. But what we're also doing is putting ideas into their heads, point one. And the second thing is that there are subliminal messages that we all take from things. So if we go back to the previous one where I was talking about the drug dealing, if you think that sounds a bit ridiculous, think about this, right? How do you judge whether you go into a restaurant or not? Imagine you're in a foreign city, you've got no idea. One of the things you will do is look and see if a restaurant looks busy. You'll go, oh, that looks good because it's busy, whereas the restaurant next door is a little bit more empty. Now, why does that make sense? Well, the answer is if a restaurant is full, chances are that they're not going to poison you, that the service is pretty decent. There seem to be a lot of other people who decide to go there. If a restaurant is empty, that is deeply suspicious. And we probably don't need to know why, but no one else is eating there. Why the hell would I take that risk? And so we are always taking cues from our environment. And that means that the messages that we transmit to people will often transmit other things. And the compliance thing here that I want people to focus on is often we tell people what we don't want them to do. That risks putting ideas in their heads. But we can also signal in the ways that we communicate. For example, by email, if we talk about the fact and we send emails to people, talk about things that aren't working the way we want them to, we are telling them that there is a compliance problem. And if we tell them there's a compliance problem, firstly, the people that are compliant may well think, well, hold on a minute, they're sending this message out. Why am I following the rules when no one else is? And more to the point, if you're somebody that's not following the rules, you will get a subliminal message that this must be a big enough problem that they're having to communicate it. Therefore, I'm okay. And this subliminal
I'm not the only
messaging,
one, clearly.
Right. And so we just need to be very, very careful. We can do this really easily and inadvertently. Classic mistake in compliance. If you want people to fill in a survey or do some training, we may send out an email that says something like 40% of you have done this. Right? And the idea is to say we need more of you to do it when it gets to 100%. But if you say 40% haven't, you're saying 60% haven't. The majority of people have not done it. That doesn't encourage me. So we should only use percentages, for example, if we're up in the 80s or the 90s. If we're sending an email to miscreants, then try not to send that to people that have complied, right? Because you don't want them to feel stupid, and try not to let miscreants see who else is on the list. We'll send an email to all the people that haven't done something, and they will see the subset of people that haven't done it. So use BCC rather than 2, right? Because all they will see is that list of people, and they will be looking who else is on that list. Am I in good company or not? So this social aspect and the subliminal message is really, really important.
Man, that's so smart. I love the Ethicsverse because I just learn so much. So hopefully you can come on every week, Christian. Elaine has a great question, and she said, great examples, Christian. What are some effective ways that these cities could have addressed these issues? So we're talking about Amsterdam here.
Yeah. So look, the key point here is that this, I'm not saying I have 100%, because the problem with this sort of thing as a compliance challenge is you kind of know there's a problem. You don't necessarily know how big the problem is. So you'll know all the people you're arresting. So you'd have to sort of look at the overall thing and say it's possible that this is actually effective, right? So I may be, and that's why I think compliance in the wild is a wonderful thing. We shouldn't just automatically include it. I'm just drawing what I think are obvious behavioral stuff we should probably think about. In this particular case,
because there's these subliminal messages that people, take from all communications.
Yeah, so I think in this case, I would be questioning, does it make sense to have communications? Would you perhaps be better off having more visible policing around there? Now, that's going to be more expensive than this particular thing, but that's likely to send you're more likely to react to a police officer being there than you are to react to this particular sign. Can we think about how do we deter the drug dealers from operating in this particular location? Well, we can arrest them, but maybe we can find other ways of making that happen. Again, back to if we're going to accept that a certain amount of drug taking is going to go on, there are police forces out there that try and push that into a location. Why do you not want that happening here? Well, the answer is it's ruining the city for the inhabitants. Is there a way that you can displace it to another location, recognizing it might happen? The communication might be absolutely fine. I think that it just seems to me that there's a risk of other things going on here. So I think tougher sentences, find ways to let people take drugs legally. And the key bit, the other reason, of course, you don't want people buying drugs on the streets is the quality of those drugs. Who knows what's in them?
Yeah, and if you want good drugs, go to the right store. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Don't
get these crappy street drugs.
So I think there are other ways. I don't necessarily have the perfect answer for this one, but in this particular case, I think that's not the smartest strategy. If I look at this one, I think that is helpful, but you might want to communicate that to people in the places where they're drinking. Right. So this may be a message that is better communicated in the bars. The other thing that you can do with this sort of thing is there are ways of designing architecture to make it less appealing. So outside the Bank of England, my former employer, for anyone that's based in London, you can go check this out, right? They have designed, there are bits of wall where little alcoves, where people, not me, obviously, but people historically have decided to relieve themselves, and they've designed the brickwork so it splashes back on you. Right, so you pee against the wall pees back. That for me is far more effective because it's a much more powerful message. If you have to go back to your friends and you look like you have wet yourself, that's social embarrassment, way more effective than being told something is illegal. And so there's that kind of thing that you can do as well. So design environments to make it less appealing. We've all heard that rumor probably about when you're a kid and they tell you if you pee in the pool, it'll change the color of the water. I have no idea if that's true or not, but that's stuck with me. And that uses social embarrassment. And we don't often use peer pressure or social embarrassment in situations where we really could. So that's another thing that I would think about doing. Let me segue quickly, Nick, into the next one, because it does sort of feed off this one. Now, you talked about nudging. And nudging is this idea that if we change the environment, we can change people's behavior. So we don't necessarily have to tell people to do something or not do something. We can just change the environment to make it more likely that they will do something. And there is a fabulous example of a nudge from Amsterdam, and that's why I'm making the link here, Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. And this is now prevalent throughout the world, but this was, I think, the first time they came up with it. Now, I apologize to the 50% of your audience who will never have seen one of these before, Nick. So we're going to have to explain what this is. This is what I would call a urinal. You'll probably call it a urinal. Either way, we know what this thing is for. Now, gentlemen sometimes have an issue with, how can I put this, Nick, aiming accurately. Mm-hmm. And some people, just can't quite hit the target. And so what they've done with this is something quite effective, recognizing that, let's face it, men are all small boys at heart. How can we get people to aim more accurate? Well, we could put a sign up that says, please aim accurately. But we know that if we do that, the likelihood is the sign becomes a target, right? We would make the situation worse, right? So what can we do instead? Let's turn this into a little game. And so they stuck a fly in there, not a real one, but they etched one in, little picture. That creates a target and therefore ensures that gentlemen aim more accurately. Now, at no point are they telling people to do that. So it's not going to achieve 100% compliance, but, and I don't know how they've measured this, there's some sort of spillage measure. The spillage went down materially as a result of doing this. And this is something called gamification, where they've turned it into something a little bit fun and engaging. You are not lecturing people, you're not patronizing them, you're not telling them to do it, but you are subtly signaling to them to do so. And they will probably be compliant without even realizing it. And I think this is a lovely example, as we often think that the way to get people to behave, follow rules, follow principles, or not do things is to tell them, to put controls in place. There may be times where actually, if we just change the environment a little bit, we can influence people's behavior in really subtle ways. And I love this because one, it's very effective, but two, we're not using up capital and irritating people. There are going to be times where we have to lecture and patronize and tell them what to do. So for every moment where the risk that we're mitigating, or the rule we need them to comply with, lends itself to this sort of thinking, we might just be able to use this. And that means we can then use the stick. And you could argue this is a carrot, which is just, it's a little game, right? Can I hit the fly or not? Quite fun. No prizes here, but it's quite sort of entertaining and engaging. Nice way to try and shift things. And so it doesn't get you 100% compliance, but it will get you quite a long way there. And I think this is a really good illustration of that sort of thinking. We can start to deploy that situation. There are certain rules we need 100% compliance. There are other rules where we just need to improve things. And if we can do it through this method, we're not imposing as much on people. They won't even notice it's there.
The prize in this example is the pride in knowing you still got that aim. You can aim straight. I did something like this with my daughters literally 2 nights ago. They needed to clean their room, and I was like so sick of speaking sternly. That's how I say yelling nicely in public. Speaking sternly, that I was like, I just turned it into a game, and I was like, whoever cleans their room fastest, gets a prize. And that, I didn't have to yell, and they got the rooms done like way faster than they would have otherwise. And I think, an example inside of an organization, we did an ethics experts maybe last year with Mike Duran from 3M, and he did a great job of gamifying divisions against each other for training completion rates. So he would post those, and there was a lot of, he was able to naturally engage in this like sort of like natural competitive spirit that is in everybody, and he was able to get his completion rates like at 99% across the whole company. 3M's a massive organization. So little tweaks like that, like exactly what you're saying, making it easy for people to do what you want, making it easy for people to do the right thing is really what the next sort of chapter of this ethics and compliance era is. You know what I mean? Totally.
Should we do another one?
Yeah, let's do another one. We're already up to 3,000 emojis, so this is really good. There we go. I feed off of these, so that's phenomenal.
So I'm going to take you to something that hopefully most of you will recognize. I was presenting this during the pandemic, and I was like, I had to explain to people what a boarding pass was, but fortunately, I don't have to do that anymore. So this is what you get when you get on a plane. And if you think about what a boarding pass, and this is a boarding pass from Brian Akers, who runs a graphic design company, and that becomes relevant in a second. If you have a look at a boarding pass, if you think about it, a boarding pass is a compliance document, right? It is trying to make sure that the right passengers get on the right planes, sit in the right seats, and that people get to the gate on time, and so on and so forth. So the whole load of behavioral things behind this, we are trying to get passengers to the right place at the right time. But if you look at this document, it is designed for people who work at the airport, right? Who look at these things all the time. For anybody else, this is utterly incomprehensible. Not like where am I going to from? The information's there, but it's incredibly unhelpful. It looks like, because this is the truth, it looks like that somebody has printed out an internal operational document and passed it to a customer in the desperate hope that they can interpret what is on here. It is absolutely hideous. And Brian Akers, who's the gentleman whose boarding pass this was, thought this is a bit weird, right? I find this thing really difficult, and I'm a frequent flyer. Imagine if you don't fly that frequently. And what he thought was, well, we can do better than that. And so he came up with his own design for his fictional airline, so he called Paul Akers, not Brian, Telter, a fictional airline. And he thought, how do I get the information that is on the previous boarding pass in a form that is user-friendly for the customer? And so you can see here, it's got exactly the same information that's there before, but it's so obvious and clear. And so what you're doing with this sort of thinking is you are increasing the likelihood that people will show up to the gate on time, that will sit in the right seat, do all the things you want them to do, and not do the things that you don't. And what's also interesting about it, if you think about it, what it does is it removes an excuse for non-compliance. Because if I've been given one of these and I don't get to the gate on time, or I get to the wrong gate, whatever, I've got a really good excuse, because I can go, I didn't know, look, and it's not unreasonable to say, I didn't know what the hell this was. That 19B, is that my seat? Is that the gate? What is going on here? Whereas, if you do it this way, what you're doing is removing the air cover for non-compliant, because you're removing that level of confusion. Nobody, imagine, even if you didn't speak English or whatever, this makes it clear to you where you need to be, what is happening, what all the rules are, if you like. And so I think this is a wonderful example of not only if we simplify things and make it clearer and make it more user-friendly, not only will we get a greater level of compliance, because let's face it, the average employee is trying to do the right thing. We can help them to do that. But we remove that excuse, because then you can suddenly say, look, this was really clear. you have failed to show up on time. It was crystal clear where you needed to be, what was going on, and you didn't make it. It's no longer the airline's fault, it's your fault. And so this kind of thing, I think, not only increases the risk of it, but it provides people with the perfect excuse. And you can imagine certain travelers might decide to go to the sports bar, get a bit carried away watching the game. They're late. I'm sorry, I didn't know, it wasn't clear. If you have given them this, they have nowhere to hide. And so I want to encourage you to think in these terms, because a lot of the processes that we design, honestly, they're a bit like this. And this is fine. If you're a member of if you work for the airline, you will see this all the time. You know how to read these. You know exactly where to find the relevant information. But it's not for you. We're giving this to passengers. This isn't a document that's designed for the airline. Or it shouldn't be. It should be designed for passengers. And passengers don't want to have to fight their way through a whole load of nonsense. They want to have something that is crystal clear and obvious. And I think the more in the world around us that we see things improving, whether that's UX, think about things like Netflix and how easy they are to use. The more we see things like that improving, the more compliance can look like, oh, I don't understand this is too much of a nightmare. And if your business, particularly if it's a consumer business, and it is spending a lot of time and effort talking about how easy the customer journey is, how easy, and improving that customer-facing stuff, there is a huge disconnect between that message that is going out there about what the organization is about and how the compliance function feels. And therefore, the compliance function feels like some sort of alien spacecraft that is landed in the middle of this world. And that, again, back to the earlier things about people not wanting to engage with it, people not respecting it, that's exacerbating that problem as well.
I mean, that's so spot on. Yeah, I mean, it needs to be cohesive, it needs to be kind of congruent. What I love about this Paul Akers kind of reimagining of it is he did exactly that. He brought fresh eyes to it, and he was like, what is the actual information that a passenger needs? And he totally reimagined it. To your point, it's got everything on it. It's got the barcode and everything. And so, an application of this is perhaps going back through your policies and, using ChatGPT or something to say, give me a too long didn't read for this policy, and give me a too long didn't read for sales and for manufacturing or for these different departments. And that's going to help you boil that down and make it a lot easier for people to digest. And if, ChatGPT is outlawed, just use your phone and you can maybe send that to yourself or text that to yourself. Just kidding.
Well, there's another thing you can do, Nick, which is Well, there's another thing that Paul Akers did. So I'm showing you here is version 10, I think, of the boarding pass. So it's gone through several iterations. And the way he put it out there and crowdsourced and said to people, what's missing on this? What could we do better? And I think that's a really powerful lesson as well, is the people who will understand how confusing your policies and processes are. It's not you, because you design them, you understand them.
Exactly.
It is the business. So go talk to the people that aren't familiar with your processes and say to them, what is confusing about this? How can we help make it clearer? Get them to help you deal with that, because they're the people that you need to persuade. And so don't talk to people that understand the reasons behind the rules, because they understand the reasons behind the rules. You need to talk to the people that don't understand it, who for whom this is just one of a multitude of other things they need to think about. So in the same way that we try and improve customer processes by getting customers to tell us what they like and what they don't like, you can do the same thing in compliance. And it's astonishing what you can get if you start to crowdsource. Now, the challenge is you will set very high expectations, because people go, oh, well, if we can change everything. And of course, you've got to be realistic about that. But there are lots of things that you can do that just change the way you talk about things, the way you process. We may not be able to change certain things. And that's another point here, is that not every airline is immediately going to be able to switch from this to this. But let's, one, aspire to this, and two, let's say, okay, we can't change that. What else could we change? And if people see that you are making an effort, and part of the reason you go and ask their opinion is so that it looks like you are listening, right? Even if you can't action it, you can explain to them why. They will feel heard and they will feel seen. That will massively increase your reputation with them. And you never know, they might have an amazing idea that is actually feasible.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is just be open to it. Like, if you've constructed this, this compliance apparatus, I'm sure you were probably very thoughtful in the creation of it. And sometimes it can be hard to hear kind of negative feedback about something that's not effective, or a message that's not being delivered as well. But be open to it. It's just data. And remember what our goal is. Our goal is to influence this human behavior. And like Christian said, many times you can get some insights, or just engaging in that process in itself is a message. I got a great question here from Terry. Hey, Terry, thanks for asking this. So this is a great one. I was recently told by a high legal and compliance executive that we cannot incentivize compliance, because then it will look like we are not compliant. It should be part of our DNA. How would you fight that attitude?
Correct. So I'm not proposing at any point that you bribe people to be compliant. And so clearly what you don't want to do is have monetary rewards for people doing the right thing, right? That feels, now there's a slight exception, I think, for things like whistleblowing, where we know that we do give rewards for people, different reasons for that. But what I'm looking at is thinking about you don't necessarily have to reward people financially. I mean, we can do, one of the things I used to do as a compliance officer was to say, okay, if we're going to do a game with people, the games need prizes. What can we do? And one of the ways that we'd find prizes is not go out and buy them and spend compliance budget on prizes, which will always get you, there'll always be, why are they spending money on prizes? Go to the marketing department and go, what do you have left over from that conference? And you will always find marketing departments always have a whole load of crap that's lying around that they don't know anything to do with. They don't want to throw it away. They keep, right, grab that, and you can turn that into something exclusive, because you can have limited edition water bottles, towels, whatever they've got. Use that as prizes, right? Everybody knows it doesn't cost very much. It's free. It's sitting around there. You can create value in things that people don't necessarily perceive value in. And Nick's example with his kids is a really good one. Any of you that have got kids, think about the techniques that you use to persuade kids to do things. You give them badges, rewards that are frankly not worth anything, but they think they are. And so we know that with kids, if the moment we turn something into a financial transaction, right, it is impossible to reverse. So if you want to bribe them, so Nick's point around cleaning the bedroom up, the moment he introduces a financial incentive, it's going to be impossible to get rid of that financial incentive. And if there's one economic dynamic that kids understand really well, it's inflation. Your problem is only going to get worse and worse and worse. So don't ever put it in a situation where you are actually rewarding people. What you are doing is you are psychologically rewarding them for doing things. I think small giveaways that you got for nothing, that you've created some value around, absolutely fine. But there are ways that we can reward people. One of the things I talk about in the book is this idea that when we get people to do mandatory training, often what we do is we give them like 30 days to do the training. And then if they haven't done it within 5 days, we start chasing them. We chase them, we chase them, we chase them, we chase them, we beat them up until they do it. But what's interesting is if you've given them 30 days, then you are just as compliant if you do it the moment you got the email as you are 29 days and 23 hours and 30 minutes before after the email was sent. Both of those things are compliant. And yet what we do is we equate, they haven't done it, therefore they're naughty people, we need to do something about that. And I say, if you're giving people 30 days, it's perfectly legit to do it in 30 days. And you can't, if you start chasing them, that's actually beating them up for doing something that's not great for a rep. So how can we persuade them to do something earlier? Well, one of the ideas I had, and this is a good example of compliance in the wild logic, is thinking, if you think about loyalty programs, airline loyalty programs would be a good example. People collect lots of points, but they often don't use. And one of the things that we've developed with one of my clients is a system that says, you can have 30 days to do training, but for every 2 days that you do the training before the deadline, we will give you a day or some unit of a day that you can then use if you need to defer future training. Now, you don't allow people to defer training forever, but you build up these credits that you can use in another context. Costs you nothing, and you make sure they can't roll over forever, so they expire after a period of time.
And they probably don't even spend them. They probably don't even spend them.
The vast majority of people do it because they go, oh, well, you never know. I might need that. That could be super useful. And you can make it really hard for them to claim them, have you kept there, all that kind of stuff. But the idea there is to create some intangible value. And that's borrowing from the same concept, right? We collect loyalty points. You will all have loyalty points on some scheme somewhere that you never spend. You can deploy that same logic here. So when I'm talking about encouraging people to do it, rewarding them for doing it, I'm doing it in a very engaging, positive way. We are miles away from bribery, and we're also not. What you mustn't do is put people in a position where if they comply immediately, somehow that's more compliant than somebody. Somebody could do the training the moment they get the email in a state of kind of rush, crack through it. Or somebody could go, I actually want to take this really seriously. I'll do it in a week's time when I've got loads of time. If we just look at when they've done it, what we're doing is misinterpreting. The person who's waited 2 weeks might be taking it really seriously, whereas the person that's done it immediately might not have done. And so often the techniques that we use don't think behaviorally. We just decide that for our convenience, we need to get those numbers up ASAP, so we're going to beat people up. And yet on their side, there's no incentive to do that. So how can we switch that incentive without, as you say, looking like we're bribing people to do something they should do anyway?
Yeah, so, I think that's a great answer. I mean, Terry, I'm sure that was a very bizarre thing to hear. We can't, we shouldn't incentivize compliant behavior because then it will look like we're not compliant. This should just be part of our DNA. But like the conditional in there, the conditional of the word should in there is an indication that it isn't part of the DNA, clearly. I mean, you can carry that logic forward and say, okay, well, then we should delete legal because we should all being law abiding, that should be in our DNA, and we should delete compliance because we should all just be compliant. Like where does that stop? And then the other thing I would say is like, what kind of incentives? You're saying positive incentives we can't have because there's I'm sure the company is replete with negative incentives and penalties for non-compliance. So it seems like kind of an off-base thing. So if you'd like me to talk to this executive, please let me know. Okay.
Have we got time for one more, Nick?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's go to my absolute favorite one. And I want to take you back to 2020, pandemic, all sorts of crazy things happening. And in schools, there were requirements in various countries, this is in the US, but requirements in various countries to have those plexiglass screens put in place. The ones that the logic went, the virus is a bit stupid and it will come up to plexiglass. It won't think about going over the top at all, but this will protect people. Anyway, so to reopen schools, we will put these plexiglass screens in place. Now, if you think about that as an adult, that's quite terrifying. None of us likes that. Imagine you're a kid. And what I love is this is a teacher who's thought through what is it like for her kids to go through this experience. And she's recognized that if you just stick these plexiglass screens around kids' desks, it's going to be weird. It's going to be a horrible environment. They're not going to be able to learn. It's just unpleasant. So what can you do? Well, she can't not use them. So she did something super clever. She turned compliance into a feature. Turns every single kid's desk, and you probably can't see it, but they've all got personalized license plates.
Cool.
Turns every single kid's desk into a mini SUV, right? Far from being a pain, this has turned compliance. Get this. This has turned compliance into something cool. They are not even going to notice this. They are going to love it. They are going to appreciate it. And when you have to take them away, I can almost bet they're going to complain. And if you want an analogy for how I think we should approach compliance, it is this. Not because you are all working with kids, some of you may be, and some of your employees may behave like they are kids. Right. It is more the idea that what she has done is sat there and thought, what does this feel like for them? How do I implement something that is frankly obstructive and painful in a way that is engaging, effective, and that they won't even notice? And that is the wish that I have for everybody, is to think about these things, because we've talked about obvious things. I've pulled signs out, processes, things that are obvious there, but lots of compliance in the world is invisible. The best kind of adverts are the things that subliminally work. You don't even notice they're there. Right. And there are lots of examples of people getting us to do things without even, why did I buy that product? Why did that happen? Right, lots of things that happen to us that we don't even realize. And so thinking about things like this, whenever you go anywhere, have a look at how are they persuading people to do things, what can we learn from it? And there are some really smart people out there doing compliance work, and this would be a really good example. They don't call it compliance. This teacher probably doesn't know what the word means. She's probably thinking more about obedience and respect and those sorts of words. But this is compliance. And she's got the situation massively under control and has really thought about it. And so for me, this is the absolute poster child for how I want to encourage you, one, to look at the world and think, a classroom, what can I learn? Well, quite a lot. But secondly, just the thinking behind it is a super smart way of going about it. And so if I had to encapsulate compliance in the world in one scenario, this is it.
So what I love about this example is that this was a perfect reframe. To your point, she reframed this plexiglass into a car. Kids love the idea of driving, and she made that very fun. But this would have never happened if she didn't engage in that empathy that she presumably had, and was able to step into the shoes of these children and, see how that might feel. And I think this is such a big opportunity for the archetypes that find themselves in ethics in compliance, because the common thread through the people that I talk to every single day is this empathy and this desire to make things better. Many times the thing that wins out in our North Star is staying out of trouble. But I'm saying if we can also put maybe 2 North Stars up there and engage in that empathy, then we can really kind of I'm just saying we're naturally wired this way. We're not finance, cold finance people. I'm one, so I can say that. But you know what I'm saying? We have this empathy. We can just engage in that. And when we're open to creatively reframing whatever, compliance item we're talking about, and really put it in the context of how can we ultimately affect that behavior, I think, the clouds part, and there's a lot of opportunities for this kind of creative application.
Totally. Yeah. And look, it's fun as well, right? It is if fun. You try and solve this problem in this way, that is exciting and interesting. And of course, to your point around generative AI, ChatGPT and equivalents, really powerful for thinking in these terms, right? How can I solve this particular problem? They'll give you tons of inspiration. So even if you think I'm not creative and imaginative, that is a tool that can help you do that.
I think we have time for one more question. Oh, by the way, I wanted to share with you guys, we started doing this thing called Ethicsverse overtime. So last week, for example, we had a bunch of extra questions. I just went through those yesterday with Rebecca, so that should be up on the YouTube channel. So check that out. I just wanted to say that before the end here. One more question from Loma. If you see that a colleague has communicated out to your employees that 40% have, quote unquote, followed a rule, indicating that 60% haven't, what can you send out to rectify that? Back to your point from before.
Yeah, it's hard, right? So sometimes it's easy to spot these things once they've happened, because you can sort of look at it, and it's much harder to do when it's you. So I think there's several solutions. One I have seen is people if a bad piece of communication went out, it's a little bit like politicians trying to hide bad news, flood more stuff out so that goes missing somewhere in the scheme of things. You can correct it in a future communication. Right? We shouldn't view these things as being fatal blows all the time.
Correct.
It's just things that don't help. And so if you're looking at 40% of you haven't done something, well, chances are that's not going to be the only email you send. Right? So make the mistake once, don't make it twice. And you may need to go a little bit overboard to correct some of the things that are there. So all of this stuff, and the other key message I want you to take away is every single time we try and influence people's behavior, whether that's an advertisement, whether that's training, whether that's communications, whether that's a policy, is an attempt to influence people's decision making. And what we should recognize is every single thing is experimental. And so don't look at it. A lot of people look at it and go, we did the training, job done. I would say every single time you launch a training course, it's a new time to experiment. So maybe can you tweak something? Can you change something? Iterate, experiment, see what works and what doesn't. And the problem a lot of people have is that they kind of get fixed into one way of doing things and they think they've nailed it. Even if it worked last time, doesn't necessarily mean it'll keep on working. A bit like adverts have to refresh themselves and brands have to refresh themselves, we may have to do the same thing. So I would look at it and say, not all is lost, but if we make a mistake once, let's not make it again.
That is such a freeing, that's such a freeing concept. If you can embrace it, because, many times I think people are like, well, it's just too much change. Well, your business is not an oak tree in the middle of a field. It's a boat on the ocean. Like, it's changing all the time. The people are changing. The regulations are changing. What the bar of attention across the population of employees is changing all the time. So if you're not in this continuous improvement sort of scientific mode of trying to, make tweaks to your program or make tweaks to what you're doing, it's just going to get stale. It just is.
And it's a much better narrative, by the way. If things go wrong and you have been constantly iterating and trying new things, that is a way more compelling narrative than we set this thing in stone and we've always done the same thing. Because if you're keeping evolving and learning, regulators will be much more sympathetic because you're actually trying to solve the problem. Exactly. And it also means the business will appreciate it, because if to next point, if the business isn't remaining static, products don't just remain constant and not change. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for compliance to mirror that. We have to have that language around it. Otherwise, it looks like we don't know what we're doing. A formal strategy of we are iterating, improving, learning as we go is an adult strategy. I know what I'm doing and I'm never going to change is what small children and stubborn politicians do. And we don't want to be either of those things.
Well, I think we got to end it on that one. That's exactly right. Round of applause for the one and only Christian Hunt. We broke 5,000 emojis. Amazing, Christian. So you've earned your pint. Is that what you're going to have in Munich tonight? A nice pint?
Do you know what? I'm literally about to jump off this to record another episode of the Human Risk podcast. So I will. Beer will have to wait, but it's fine. That's all good.
You keep those episodes coming. If you guys have not followed Christian by now, you need to, and definitely download and follow the Human Risk podcast. It is phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining, Christian. Next week, we got another banger for you. So hope you guys can join us. Bring your friends, bring your team. More and more teams are coming to this. So this gives you a lot of stuff to talk about. And, you got to get your team in this huddle dialed in on these concepts if you're ever going to have any success rolling it out across your organization. So remember, you got the weight of the world on your shoulders. You got other people to help you with it. You have a tough job, but you're making the impact that is necessary. So keep fighting, keep pushing, and we'll see you next week.